Two razors sit on a bathroom counter. They look almost the same, they shave almost the same, run your thumb down either edge, and you couldn't tell them apart. But one cost $5. A name brand cartridge, the kind you've probably been buying for years. The other cost $2. It arrived in a padded envelope shipped straight from China. And here's the part most people never think about. The factory making that $2 razor may also be making razors for brands you've paid 5 times as much for. For generations, the math was simple. If you shaved, chances are Gillette was somewhere in the bathroom. Your father used it. Maybe his father did too. For decades, the brand felt almost as permanent as the razor itself. So how is the most unshakable empire in your bathroom quietly bleeding out? One $2 razor at a time. The answer isn't really about China. It's about a trap Gillette built to make its empire harder to escape, and eventually found itself trapped inside. Before you understand the trap, you have to understand the empire. By 2010, Gillette controlled close to 70% of the global men's blades and razors market. Not a lead, a staggering share of the market. Gillette. It didn't happen by accident. Go back to the First World War. Millions of American servicemen were issued shaving kits, including Gillette razors. Many of those men came home with the habit. They kept shaving the same way, and the brand became part of everyday life, passed from one generation to the next. By the end of the century, Gillette had become more than a choice. It was the default, the name you reached for without thinking. It was simply there, in bathroom cabinets and on store shelves generation after generation. Then in 2005, Procter & Gamble bought it, one of the largest companies on earth. The price? $57 billion? $57 billion. For a company that sells you a thin piece of metal to drag across your face. That's how valuable owning the world's shave had become. So here's the strange part. An empire this big shouldn't be killable. Too large, too trusted, too locked in. And for decades, it wasn't. Challenger after challenger came after Gillette, trying to take a piece of the market. Again and again, Gillette found a way to hold them off. They all came the same way, the obvious way. And again, Gillette had an answer waiting. One built into the business model long before the next challenger arrived. So what was that hidden weapon? The thing that made Gillette almost impossible to beat? The weapon was never the razor. It was what came after it. Gillette wasn't really selling you a razor. It was selling you a relationship that started with the handle. The handle was the way in. The real money came from what you kept buying afterward, the blades. And those blades were designed to fit Gillette's own handles. Buy the razor once, and you were pushed toward the same company's refills, again and again and again. That's the trap. Cheap handle, expensive blades. A customer locked in for life. Now you've probably heard the legend. King Gillette gave the razor away, then made his fortune on the blades. There's just one problem. It isn't true. When Gillette launched, the razor wasn't cheap at all. The handle cost $5. Back then, that was roughly a third of a worker's weekly wage. Picture that, a third of your paycheck for a razor. And Gillette protected that price fiercely. He warned he'd drag stores to court if they dared sell it for less. So where did the give it away story come from? It came later. When the business model changed, for years his patents blocked anyone else from making blades that fit his razor. Then in 1921, those patents ran out. Overnight, rivals could make their own compatible blades. So the economics flipped. Make the handle cheaper, get it into as many hands as possible, then lean harder than ever on the blades to carry the profits. What began as a response to competition became the model that defined the empire. And it survived for one reason, just one. This entire empire only works as long as the blade stays special. So here's the question Gillette never wanted anyone to ask out loud. What happens the day the blade stops being special? The day anyone can make one just as good? For decades, everyone tried to beat Gillette the same way, the obvious way. They tried to build a better razor. If Gillette had 2 blades, a rival launched. 3. Gillette answered with 4. Then 5. Then a vibrating handle. Then a lubricating strip. It became an arms race. More blades, more tech, more everything. And Gillette kept winning that race. Because technology was the game Gillette knew how to play. And it had the money, patents, and distribution to stay ahead. Nobody was going to beat the king simply by building another premium razor. So the challengers kept losing. Not because their razors were bad, because they were playing Gillette's game. on Gillette's field. Then, in 2012, someone stopped playing it. A small startup called Dollar Shave Club didn't try to promise a better shave. It asked a different question entirely. Why are you paying $4 for a single blade? They said out loud what a lot of customers had quietly wondered, that the price had stopped making sense. And they said it in a video, one video, shot in a single day for about $4,500. And it worked better than anyone expected. 12,000 orders in the first 48 hours. So many that the website collapsed under the traffic. Overnight, a razor startup nobody had heard of was suddenly everywhere. But here's what matters, and what most people get wrong. This wasn't China. Dollar Shave Club's razors were sourced from Korea, while its biggest rival, Harry's, bought a factory in Germany. These were American companies, and their breakthrough had nothing to do with Chinese manufacturing. They didn't beat Gillette with cheaper manufacturing. They beat it with a cheaper idea, that you were being overcharged, and it landed. They cracked something open, but they didn't destroy the empire. They dented it. They proved something far more dangerous. Customers were willing to walk away when the price stopped feeling justified. The real bleeding hadn't started yet, because the place that would truly break the price, it had been quietly making the world's razors all along. That place was China. For years, China's factories weren't the threat. They were part of the supply chain, the quiet manufacturing engine behind countless razor brands. In manufacturing hubs like Ningbo, Yiwu, and across Zhejiang province, factories were producing enormous volumes of razors and blades, not just for their own brands. Many also manufactured OEM and private label products for companies selling them under different names. Think about what that means. A factory could manufacture a razor for one company, then produce a similar product under another brand, while the customer on the shelf saw two completely different prices. For a long time, that didn't matter, because those factories had no way to reach you. They needed a brand, a middleman, a shelf in a store. Then, that wall disappeared. Platforms like Temu and AliExpress changed the equation. A factory in China could now reach you directly. No brand, no distributor, no shelf in a store, and suddenly, razors could show up at your door for around $1, sometimes less. The middle layers that had helped support Gillette's premium price were suddenly much easier to bypass. And it went further. Chinese manufacturers such as Bailey and Weishi built reputations for making capable shaving hardware at much lower prices. In fact, some Western brands have taken razors from makers like these, put their own name on them, and sold them for several times the price. Sit with that. In some cases, the difference between a cheap razor and a premium one may have less to do with where the hardware was made, and more to do with the name attached to it. Similar steel, similar edge, similar shave, different stickers, which leaves one uncomfortable question hanging over the entire shaving aisle. If a $2 razor shaves just as well as a $5 one, what were you ever actually paying for? Here's the answer, and it's not what you'd expect. You weren't paying for a better shave. You were paying for a belief. For decades, Gillette's model taught consumers one simple idea. The handle was the cheap part. The recurring blades were the part worth paying for. And those blades were supposed to be special. That belief was the empire, not the steel. The story around the steel. And it worked brilliantly. As long as one thing stayed true, customers believed the proprietary blade was meaningfully better than the alternatives. That was the whole game. Keep the blades special, and customers keep paying. The lock-in holds. But now look at what Chinese manufacturing and direct-to-consumer commerce did to that idea. The moment cheaper manufacturers could produce blades good enough to deliver a comparable shave, the belief started to crack. If a $2 blade can get the job done well enough for most people, the premium blade has a much harder question to answer. What exactly are you paying extra for? And here's the part that stings. The very thing that made Gillette unbeatable is the exact thing that left it exposed. The company had spent decades convincing consumers that the blade was where the value lived. So once cheaper blades became good enough, that same lesson turned against them. If the shave feels close enough, why keep paying the premium? China didn't have to break Gillette's business model. It only had to make the underlying product easier to buy at a much lower price, and let consumers start questioning the premium for themselves. This is the truth hiding under the entire story. The moat was never the blade. It was the belief that you needed a better one. Take away that belief, and the empire doesn't need to collapse overnight. Its pricing power simply starts to disappear. So that should be the end, right? Empire exposed. Belief is broken. Gillette finished. Except, it isn't finished. Not even close. Because when you actually look at the numbers, Gillette isn't collapsing at all. And that changes everything you just heard. So if the belief is broken, Gillette should be dead by now. It isn't. Here's what actually happened. In fiscal 2024, P&G reported growth for Gillette, along with an improvement in its value share. And in fiscal 2025, P&G's broader grooming business continued to grow. Read that again. The empire people keep writing obituaries for is still standing, still selling, still competing, and still capable of winning. So were we wrong? Was the whole story, the $2 razors, the broken belief, just noise? No. And this is the part that actually matters, because two things can be true at once. Gillette survived, and something did die. You just have to look at the right thing to see it. For decades, Gillette had a superpower most companies only dream of: pricing power. It could introduce a new blade, a new handle, a new feature, and ask customers to pay more, because where else were they going to go? That is what died, not the brand. The freedom to charge whatever it liked and know you'd still buy. Today, Gillette has to justify that premium in a market where cheaper alternatives are only a few taps away. Every premium dollar now sits next to a $2 question mark on the same screen, and that changes how an empire behaves. So Gillette isn't dying, but it's no longer untouchable. It's a giant that finally has to look over its shoulder, which leaves one last question, the biggest one of all. If cheap really is this good, if the premium was mostly a story, then does that mean you should always buy the $2 razor? Because the answer to that is not as simple as it sounds. So should you always buy the $2 razor? Not so fast. Because cheap comes with its own hidden bill. Start with quality. At the ultra cheap end, consistency can be a gamble. One razor might work perfectly well. Another might tug, scrape, or simply feel worse. And that's one thing a strong brand has always sold alongside the product itself: consistency. Then there's the waste. Many cheap cartridge razors are still disposable, and cheaper products can make it easier to replace them rather than keep using one for longer. The plastic and metal eventually end up somewhere, a cost that doesn't appear on the receipt. And look one layer deeper at the platforms themselves. Rock-bottom prices can raise harder questions about working conditions and supply chains, and about what happens to the data you hand over when you buy through these platforms. So no, cheap isn't automatically the answer. Sometimes you get what you pay for is still true. But here's the thing to hold on to. That was never really the point. The point was never that cheap always wins. It's that the premium was never as safe as it looked. For a century, Gillette's price felt like a law of nature. It wasn't. It was a story, and stories can be questioned. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. And the pattern doesn't stop at razors, because this same quiet unraveling, it's happening to empires you'd never expect, far bigger than a bathroom. Shelf? So this was never really about shaving. Look closely, and you'll see the same shape everywhere. Printers sold cheap so they can sell you ink forever. Coffee machines that only take their pods. Phones that need their chargers, their cables, their accessories. Every one of them runs on the same quiet trick Gillette perfected. Convince you the expensive part is worth it, and lock the door behind you. But Gillette's story just showed the crack in all of them. The moat was never really the product. It was the belief that you couldn't get it anywhere else. And a belief is a fragile thing. The moment someone offers the same thing for less, and you realize the shave feels just as close, the spell breaks. The disruption was never a cheaper technology. It was someone refusing to accept that the premium was natural. So look around your own home tonight. The chargers, the pods, the cartridges. Somewhere out there, an empire that still feels untouchable already has a $2 crack running through it.